I bet you are going to love this conversation as much as we did. Alesha Escobar is the best-selling author of the Gray Tower Trilogy, the fantasy writer of 11 young adult novels, a mother of six. Are you doing this math? A graduate student, a teacher, and somehow one of the most humble humans I've ever met. We had a blast talking to her about the prompt that got her started on her first book, the characters that she loves to write and why, and the rules of her writing process, especially as it relates to AI and creativity. We had so much fun, in fact, that I didn't ask her where you all could follow her at the end. So here it is, aleshaescobar.com. Don't worry, it's in the show notes. I hope you love this as much as we did. What if story is the answer to our crises of meaning and belonging, to our impulse to heal our lives and help others, to our desire and drive to leave this world better than we found it? Now, we love good stories. In fact, we're kind of obsessed, not just with the stories themselves, but with the stories behind the stories. Their oddly perfect timing, the healing process they provoke in their authors, and their capacity to catalyze individual and collective change. And we love exploring these with writers, thought leaders, entrepreneurs, healers, parents, and others. Tune in to hear these stories behind the stories and entertain with us the real possibility that whether you are a teller or a consumer, story is always offering or leading us to an answer. Welcome to Sips of Story and Sanity, where we talk about the stories behind the stories with authors and speakers and thought leaders and novelists. A few of my family members here at Saved by Story. Erin's not here today, but Sister Alyssa is, and some of my clients turned friends turned family. Carlin and Lori are here to help me make sure that we get the most delicious sips of story and sanity out of this experience. And today we have Alesha Escobar. Welcome, Alesha. Super
Thank you.
excited to have you. From the very brief interactions we've had, I know that you have lots of, I don't know how I can call it sanity because what you've accomplished just seems unbelievable. But I know you have a lot to share today, and I'm excited. So Alesha writes fantasy to support her chocolate habit. And when I read that, I was like, she belongs here with us. That was
Yes.
it. She enjoys reading everything from Tolkien and Dante to the Dresden Files and Hellblazer comics. She resides in California with her partner in crime, Lewis, a 20-year art veteran on The Simpsons television show. She's the author of the best-selling Gray Tower Trilogy, an action-packed supernatural spy thriller set in an alternate 1940s. So Alesha and I actually we met for the first time, even though we sort of hung out in the same building for what, four and a half
Yeah, 4
years,
years.
and we never met each other. We were in the classic books program at Biola University. I
Mhm.
didn't know it until we went to the reunion of last month. Oh my gosh, that feels like ages
Yes.
ago already.
Yes.
And we sat next to each other and struck up a conversation. And when I heard that she had written 11 novels and raised six children along the way, I was like, we need to talk after this because you have some superpowers I need to learn more about. So I'm excited for you to share today. And I thought we could just start with, you know, there are people who write books because they feel compelled to share a message, something strikes
Mhm.
them. But then there are people who like they've always loved writing, or they've always thought someday I'll write a children's book or something. Like there's a love of writing. And I feel like you can't write 11 novels without having a love of like of the process, right?
Yes.
So when did you notice that about yourself that you loved to write?
Well, I started writing my first story when I was 7 years old. I saw it as a creative outlet. I was always the kid who was daydreaming and thinking of scenarios and characters. So I kind of transferred that over into, writing little short stories. And I had a wonderful sixth grade teacher who, bless her heart, she totally encouraged me. And she would take like maybe the last 30 to 40 minutes of class at the end of day to sit my classmates down and read my short stories to them. And they loved it. And I thought, wow, I would love to keep doing this. And so I just grew from there, kept writing. And going along, I ended up, I don't know how, but I ended up in a math science magnet high school. So then my focus and the pressure from my family was, oh, you're, the first one going to college, you're going to be a doctor. And if you hadn't talked to me back then at Biola, I was probably a biochem major at the time,
Mhm.
at the beginning. And then eventually I came back to my love of literature, especially going through the Great Books program, Tori, and finding that love of Shakespeare and Dante and Tolkien. And I'm like, you know what? I'm going back to writing. And so I went over to English with a writing emphasis. And after that, it took me a while to st really get into my first novel, what became my first novel, which was The Towers Alchemist. And it was partly inspiration from my husband, who kind of gave me a writing challenge. He said, okay, I think it was when you know, uh, stories with vampires were big. So he's like, we got to have some vampires in there, but we don't want it to be like the typical sparkly vampire romance. And I'm like, okay. And so he gave me this really interesting scenario with a 1940s setting, a spy, and she's, kind of torn between wanting this normal life and finding love, but also her duty to, fighting in this war and trying to win against and prevail against, the bad guys. So from that came that story. And when I first hit the publish button, I was so happy, so proud of myself. I'm like, I did it. I finished the story. And it was when Kindle Direct Publishing was pretty new. And so I figured, hey, it's on Amazon. So, people will just flock to it. And that, of course, wasn't the case, right?
Yeah,
And so, and
definitely not the case.
yeah, I think that was like my first big realization that, okay, I need to
Mhm.
actually have a plan. I need to have a little bit more than just hopes and dreams and just, throwing it out there.
Yeah,
And from there, I just learned so much about being an author, not only just the writing side of it, but also just the visibility side and getting your work out there.
yeah. Well, one of the things that we are pretty obsessed about here, it's just, I don't know why it tends to happen more in this space, or I just find that the people who sort of land in the Save by Story community are usually getting something really rich out of the creative process. There's some aha or, delicious insight that they get about themselves, or some wild thing that happens in the background, like what happened with Carlin this week. There's like a certain type of magic that happens when you're in that creative process. And sometimes it's really illuminating for that experience of seeing like more of what you could be, or
Mm.
something like that. So did you have anything? I mean, that's so cool that you got the dare from the husband, like, here, try
Yes.
this. So it makes me curious, like, what came for you through the process of writing, or was it just really sort of simple and didn't have much of that personal reflection in it?
I would say what came for me was definitely grounding myself in the creative process and learning how to express myself through story and also using story to help reach others. My mother, I remember giving the book to my mother and she read it and she just came to me one day. She's like, I love the story. She's like, on certain parts, my heart was beating fast and, I was nervous and, all of these different reactions. And, to have that connection with other people, because I know that what I like to get out of literature when I'm reading out of a great story is to feel like you're involved or immersed in that world, that the characters could be your friends or that you could be one of them, walking along this journey. And I remember an interesting quote. If I am correct, I believe it was C.S. Lewis who said that the purpose of stories is to educate and entertain. And I hold by that when we are sharing stories, we do educate others and we also entertain them. And that's why it's so easy. And coming from an educational perspective, I'm also a teacher. Why we tend to tell children stories and give them fables and legends to go by because we want to teach them certain concepts through story. And that's, I think, part of human nature is sharing stories and learning from them and growing from them.
Yeah. 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 Well, we were sitting there, the founder of the program, John Mark Reynolds, it
Mhm.
was fun. We didn't get to see him, which I just was so bummed. But
And
I remember, and I don't know, maybe we were in the same room listening to him at one point, or he said this plenty of times, this idea of, you know, taking the truth that you were learning and uncovering as you were uncovering it and
mhm.
embedding it. I think he used the term like be the wedge, like create
Yes.
wedges in the culture. And you remember that term?
Yes.
And it was like such a, I mean, we were even talking about it there at the reunion, this, how he foresaw a lot of what was coming in the culture as a result
Yes.
of some of the bad stories that were starting
Yeah.
to show up. Like,
Yeah.
those stories that are we watched one this week and I was telling my husband, he was like, what was wrong with that? I'm like, it's like this. The storytelling was so bad that it was basically just a bunch of monologues. Like
Oh, yes, yes.
it was bad storytelling. So I
Yes.
love that you're taking all of these, love of not just good stories, but the process of writing
Mhm.
and reaching young people. So, what to your writing process? What does that look like when you have, like I said, you've raised a family of six, right?
Yes,
So,
yes.
what does that look like for a creative person who's this driven to get these stories out? What did you learn about the creative process or your time that you feel might be useful for other creatives listening to this today who are like, how in the world is she doing
Yeah, well, I will definitely say that I am not a pantser. I have to outline, I have to plot it out. And whether it's, like a 3 act or 4 act structure, I set, up the story, my characters, the world. And even though you want to like get to the good stuff and, jump right away into the action, you need that foundation first because it'll save you down the road. I even keep, my story Bibles, an Airtable because at some point you lose track of people, you lose track of items. Like, where did I leave that magic sword? It's back in chapter 5 and I haven't seen it, and just like different things and just keeping things consistent. So, because the point is, to have your world seem as if your reader could step into it. But if it's all kind of mishmash and not structured, they're going to feel that, they're going to see that. So I think part of the creative process is knowing that there's an aspect of it that's, okay, I have to sit down and plot this out and plan it. But then I also allow for inspiration because I may be intending to go in one direction based on my outline, but a character ends up saying or doing something, and I'm like, you know what? I'm going to keep that. I'm going to keep that. And this changes things, and we're going to go on a different road now. But so I think there's a fine balance to it. And then just, you know, being around, 6 kids and having to do it, I did a lot of nighttime writing or just bouncing a baby on my knee while I'm typing with one hand on my laptop.
Yeah. Yeah, well, I imagine that I haven't written fiction myself, but the novelists who are prolific that I've spoken with, they do sort of talk about it like it's a faucet that's hard to turn off, right? Like it's sort of
Yes.
you're always, and that's how the unconscious works, right? It's
Mhm.
always goal seeking, trying to like find answers, get you answers, give you ideas, solve problems. But when you add that element of, I'm writing this, I'm trying to figure out what is this character's actual motivation because they said this thing that told me something else.
Yes.
Um, it's sort of like it follows you, which makes me curious about things like, wow, how do you do that while you're, cooking dinner and doing laundry with
Right.
bouncy babies on your knees? So,
Yes, yes.
yeah,
I'm definitely going at a snail's pace compared to, a lot of my peers who can produce like several books per year. I'm happy if I just produce one a year at this point with everything that's going on. But what excites me about it is, just learning. And I think also a few of my books were co-written with co-authors who are just like amazing friends. And that helped as well because learning and looking at their writing style challenged me like, okay, I gotta get a little bit better. I gotta sharpen this particular skill. And I think doing that as well when you're co-writing with someone, it really brings out your creativity and really pushes you because you're kind of synergizing and you're like seeing like, okay, these are the possibilities, and we're trying to bring both of our points of views and talents into one cohesive story so that it's at least seems to the reader as if one person wrote it.
nice. And do you have someone or a group of people sort of reading as you go, or do you complete it and then share it?
Uh, Sometimes my husband will read and I'll also just finish it up. I'm at the point now where I've written so much that I'm confident enough to just, write it all, send it to my editor, then send it off to my advanced readers, and then let them decide. But if I were at the beginning, then I would definitely have some, alpha and beta readers mixed in there to help me along.
Nice. Do you guys have any questions for her about the writing process before we dive
I
into
do.
the marketing
I do. I
journey?
do. I do. I do. I do. So, you write primarily paranormal fantasy, right?
Yes.
Okay, so I started in magical realism. It's a series I'm currently working on. And then when I first started reading fantasy, it started coming to life. And I started getting inspiration for fantasy series, but it came to me in a completely different way than the first genre. Like the first genre was very raw. My bones were sort of the
Yeah.
structure of the story. And then I went through and fictionalized it, and it didn't come to life. But
Mhm.
fantasy, I just had new characters popping up and coming to me in dreams and talking, and then a piece of the world would fall in, and it was just totally crazy how much it came to life. And I don't know if that was because there was so much more creative power around obviously fantasy because there's so many more possibilities when you're
Yes, yes.
not writing about your own stuff. But I was curious if anything like that happened for you in your writing process.
Yes, sometimes I would, have dreams and I would wake up and remember what I dreamed about and go, wow, that would make such a good story. Or I might do something with that. So sometimes I'll jot down little notes and, save it for later. And if I happen to come back to it and want to make something out of it, I will. Or if it's just something passing, then let it pass. But yeah, definitely. One of the things that draws me to fantasy is you have such a huge open bucket of possibilities, of characters, of scenarios. And as long as lay that groundwork, like say, lay the groundwork of that world, of that system, and bring it all together nicely, it can still work. The fantastical, people won't get upset at a story for being, just fantastic, as in, the fantasy sense. But it has to have its own internal coherence.
Yeah.
And I think I saw on Amazon that one of your series is being adapted to screenplay.
Yes, that's the Gray Tower Trilogy, and I actually got to write the screenplay, which is fun, and I had like a kind of like a co-writer advisor kind of nudging me along and that was a whole other beast because you know being when you're writing a story, a novel, um, or even just a novella, you're used to adding in the descriptions, people's inner thoughts. You can't do that with a script, and you have to squeeze it into that 120 pages. And it was so tough. So I'm like, that's why they leave out certain things from the book, or like what happened to this character, or they didn't say it that way in the book. And now I know why. It's because you're limited, by the 120 pages of the script, unless you want to go for a 3 hours Lord of the Rings type script. But and also you have to rely on dialogue and what's visually going along. And even then, you can't always describe everything in detail because that's to be left up to, like, say, the producer, director, how they interpret it. And sometimes, even when you want a character to say something in a certain way, that's left up to the actor to interpret and decide. So I found out quickly that it can be limiting in some ways to write screenplay, but at the same time, it's something that I wanted to challenge myself to do because it's another form of writing and storytelling that can be very impactful and beautiful, but you have to do it right. So that was a fun experience. And yeah, I learned so much from that.
Yeah, it's like you have to be a million times more intentional about every detail that you put in there.
Right, right. And then, of course, just kind of like pitching it, I got to meet with the producer and pitch the story. I'm glad it was a phone call pitch because I was like nearly shaking and sweating, I'm like, oh my goodness.
You get a voice stabilizer.
Yes. Something. But I needed all the help I could get because it's so nerve-wracking. It's, because that's, your story is your baby, you're sharing a part of yourself and you're sharing your stories, right? So yeah, it's a big step, it's a big process, but it's part of it if if you're really committed to it, if you're really, really serious about it, then sometimes you have to kind of make those leaps.
And was that the first series or the second or the third? Which one did they grab? Like,
It was the first series, the first book of the first series, of the Gray Tower Trilogy, and I had a lot of fun with that. And recently I submitted a different series, The Wayward Wizard, the first book of that series, for TV adaptations for like a contest. So we'll see how that one goes. And one of the things I loved about it is because I joke around sometimes and say I like to write, the snarky characters and some of the villains because in real life I'm the nice person, I'm the nice teacher, I'm the softie and I'm patient and kind. So I write these characters sometimes that mouth off and they're smart asses and they talk back. And sometimes I'm like, this is sometimes how I really feel.
those
Yep.
characters are the best.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's good stuff. Anyone else have any questions about the writing?
Do well, not no. It's not about writing. It's about the role her husband plays in this. So
Mhm.
it sounds like um, I know my husband is like my biggest cheerleader, my biggest fan, right? And it sounds like your husband is kind of the same way. So I was just curious when it comes to the screenplays or it comes to a new process. How helpful is he in helping you to accomplish some of those things with his background?
Oh, it's super helpful. Like, for example, with just, working on the screenplay, he gives me insight. He'll take a look and he goes, oh, because he deals with scripts every day because he's a storyboard artist for the TV show. And he'll look and say, okay, usually when, we have the scripts, this needs to be done and you need to put this in or you need to take this out because that has nothing to do with, film or TV. And I'm like, okay. And so he gives great advice. And then also he loves fantasy. He's a huge fantasy geek like me. So he will sit down and read, my works and he'll give me feedback. And sometimes I'll get mad at him.
I was just going to ask that. It's a little difficult to get that feedback from somebody so close.
Yes, especially because I would say that when I first started out writing, it was difficult for me to write male characters because the way that I wrote them, uh, it was a little bit more heavily centered from my point of view of like having, a male friend or, my experiences. And so he goes like, okay, a guy wouldn't say that or talk like that. He's like, and so at first I was angry with him, but then I'm like, okay, I see your point of view. And so I kind of had to place myself in that mindset. And I got better at it as time went on, as I wrote more male characters. And I think that made me confident enough to start the Wayward Wizard series, which is the main central character is a male, and you're in his head and hearing his thoughts. And so far, no one's ever called me out on it or told me it was unrealistic. So I think I did a pretty good job.
So, so that's on the writing side of it.
hmm
How about on the family side of it? Does he ever like do you ever get those moments where you just go, I just need, 3 hours or I just need 2 hours? Can I either you escape or he take them to the park or, does he ever help out that way?
Oh, yes, he did that a lot when they were younger. I'm lucky enough that we started having children young, so now they're older. It's like the teenagers are kind of off doing their own thing. My youngest is 10, but she takes after dad and she loves art, so she'll just go off and draw for a few hours. And I'm like, okay, I can sit down and write or do this or that. And that helped a lot because, if you don't have a partner who's kind of like helping take that load off, writing feels more of a burden or it feels like something that just slips through your fingers because you're like, when am I ever going to have time for that? And then sometimes I'm still challenged with it too because I work full time. Even though the kids are older, they still need me for certain things. And I'm also back in school again, going for my doctorate. So I just like have a full stack of things to do. And I'm like, okay, when am I going to have time to write? It might be like on a Saturday afternoon, or maybe I'll wait till, I'm on spring break or summer break, and then I'll just pound it out, just go for it.
That's awesome. Wow. I figured you had to have somebody that was pretty supportive behind
Yeah.
you. Um, and family is such an important piece of it. I know I
hmm
try to incorporate my family as much as I can. And so those kiddos, and I didn't realize they were that much older. So that's awesome. At least you're not
Yeah.
bouncing them on your knee anymore, right?
Right, right.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you sharing. And I can't wait to get one of those series and start reading it because it sounds amazing.
Oh, thank you.
I am curious because you said you're still writing, but these three series are complete. Does that mean there's another one on the horizon, or you're focusing on the screenplay? What's next?
Right now, I am focusing on there's a series called the Soul Weaver Trilogy that I just started. I finished the first book last year, and since I put it as a trilogy, I'm gonna have to finish the trilogy. So I need to do books 2 and 3. But then for the Wayward series, I think, yeah, I finished about 4 books. And I'm like, okay, maybe I'll take a little break from that series. But then, I get an email from an awesome reader like in Australia. When is book 5 coming? And I'm like, I actually have a lot of Australian readers. So I'm like, okay, book 5 will be coming. I promise it will be coming. It may be slow, but it will be coming. So you're energized by, people who are like, we need the next one. We need the next one. We need more. So I know I'm going to be working on those 2 series. And then, of course, I'm also kind of trying to give some attention to like the screenplays. But yeah, it's like all a huge balancing act. Sometimes some things have to, go on hold for a bit. Some things need to be dusted off from the back of the closet and brought forward. But yeah, it's like kind of like prioritizing, I think.
I have another question, shocker. So, when in your inspiration and creative process, you said you're a crazy outliner. When and how do you know that it's going to be a trilogy or a 4 book or a 5 book, how does that usually evolve for you? Do you have to like get into the writing and then you kind of see it working, or is it after the first book comes out?
I usually do it when I first conceptualize the series. I think about, well, what's it about? What kind of world is this set in? What are the character arcs? Like, how are these characters going to grow and change? And based on that, then I can see if, okay, this can be done in 3 books, or more than 3 books. You know, I don't know. I have a little bit of a love-hate relationships with series that just go on and on, like book 18, book 19. It's like, okay, that's enough. Especially once it gets same old, right? Almost like, when you're watching your favorite TV show, then it starts to get repetitive. It's like, okay, we've done that for like 2 seasons already. So, it's like you want to know when to, stop and end it. But then at the same time, if there's enough of a world in there, if there's enough characters, because with the Wayward Wizard series, I could see it. I originally wanted it to be about 6 books, and I've done 4, but there's a possibility it may extend a little bit more than 6, just because there are certain aspects and plot lines that can be explored and that can be done in another book or two. So we'll see how that goes.
Do you ever fall in love with a particular character in a particular way, and you're just like, ah, I want to create a spin-off of this character in particular,
Oh
take it in a different
yes, that
direction?
so happens. Oh, like I have one of those types of characters in my Wayward Wizard series. He's an automaton. He looks and sounds like a human, but he's a robot, a machine, and he's powered by magic. And he's been, programmed and trained to be like a human, but at the same time, you can tell that he's not quite human, and he's very moralistic and proper because that's how he's been programmed. And the readers really love that character. His name is Lucas. And I could totally see him having his own spin-off, also like, with his origin story and things like that. So that would be a lot of fun. And then there are characters who you get attached to and you plot it for them to die. And you're like, oh, am I really going to kill this guy off? Or maybe I'll let him live. So that's happened to me a couple of times where someone who's meant to die actually ends up living because I just love him so much. So yeah, it happens.
That's actually leads me into another great question. How do you decide when a character dies? I remember watching an interview with Rebecca Garros, and she was talking about when Liam died, which is everyone's favorite character, and she was like, he had to. He was too perfect. He was just perfect. There was no evolution for his character left. Like his arc was finished. He had to die. It was so I haven't killed any characters off yet, so I'm curious how that comes up for you.
I look at character deaths in 2 ways. One is it might fit like a certain trope. For example, the wise old mentor who probably has to die so that they can step out of the way and let the hero come into their own, right? And then there's a death where it's meant to raise the stakes, like, oh my gosh, that person died. Things are getting dangerous. And this is important, pay attention. Because, sometimes you'll have like certain minor characters die or side characters die, and you're like, oh, he died. Too bad. But then if it's, kind of like a secondary character or even a main character, you're like, ooh. And I think that's if you've ever read Game of Thrones, I think I stopped at some point because I just couldn't take it anymore. But with Game of Thrones, you're like, oh, okay, I like this character, or this character is at least someone I can sort of, understand and follow along throughout the story. And they end up dying because he has a habit of killing off the noble characters. And yeah, it part of it is like, okay, yeah, it raises the danger, it raises the stakes, and no one is safe in the world. But at the same time, if you do it too much, then you just become disheartened as a reader because you're like, man, there's like no hope. And that's the opposite of what I want my readers to feel. I want them to feel inspired. I want them to feel like they've had an adventure. I want them to feel like when I'm stepping into this book and I'm stepping into this world with some old friends, I don't want them to feel like dread. And so, but I think it all depends on what you're going for. Maybe some authors want to go for that, with the grim dark.
Oh.
Yeah, do you ever wrestle with that? Like, oh, I want to do this, or I think I need to kill this character off, but oh my gosh, they're like my readers are gonna hate me. Like my readers are not gonna like me if I do this.
Yes, sometimes I do take that in consideration, like, oh, okay, how will my readers react to this?
I hold
So
grudges. I hold
yeah,
very serious
yes,
grudges toward
yes,
those authors.
yes, yes, you run the risk of those grudges. So I'm like, oh, okay, is this grudge worthy? So like if it's someone that I know that I'm going to get flack for killing off, I'm like, okay, at least make the death meaningful and make it like maybe self-sacrificial. Like their death ends up bringing about some type of good, or their death helps move our hero forward in a special way, so that it's not meaningless, or it's not like, oh, I'm just getting rid of the character. It has more meaning, more weight to it.
So
Good
remind me, what
answers.
age group is your books for? They're for older kids, right?
With my Soul Weaver trilogy, the one that just came out, it's a young adult fantasy, so young adult and older. I would say 15, 16 and up, because it's I would say I would categorize the romance in the story as like a sweet romance, it's nothing explicit or anything. I don't even think I really have any curse words in that story. Wayward Wizard series, plenty of cuss words.
So that was
Uh,
my question was how do you decide? Because that's kind of a
yeah.
interesting age group. I write for younger kids, so
Mhm.
7 to 12. And so I can still say sweet and nice and like
Mhm.
I can't include some of that. I have to be really careful. And
Right,
so
right.
how do you decide how much dark or how much, you know, of the romance, or how do you decide how much of that is going to be acceptable, especially with the world we live in today, you know?
Oh, that's a good question. I would definitely say that um, based on how I constructed the world and the characters, I decide on, okay, is this going to be, young adult or adult? I don't write children's at all. So it's either going to be just young adult and older. And to the degree that I might have something explicit, like say, violence or gore or cussing, things like that. It just depends on the the characters and the particular environment they're in. Like for example, with Wayward Wizard, there's a bunch of a jaded, snarky wizard in the middle of Los Angeles. He's going to be cursing up a storm. Whereas, say in Towers Alchemist, you have like 1940s, you might have a couple of people saying, damn or hell, but, nothing too insane. And so it just kind of depends, right? And also, I do know that there's a line that I won't cross like at all. Like, for example, I'm not going to have certain explicit scenes in my books just because I don't want to have to write that. I don't want to have to research that. Um, and actually, that brings up another interesting issue, just writing with magic and fantasy. Like, um, there are certain things I research to have the verisimilitude, the semblance of it being real or authentic. But, it's like, okay, that's pure occult. I'm not going to go and read this particular book because that's just an occult book and I'm not doing the occult. And so I have to be careful about what I choose and, pick for my stories and to what extent I want to use it. Like, for example, in Towers Alchemist, she is an alchemist. So I approach alchemy from, the historical medieval point of view. And so, thank goodness for my education with Tori and, the classics, because you get to learn a lot about that. And so I approach it from kind of like a fictitious, fantastical point of view. And I don't want to be intentionally purely authentic with it because I don't want to, you know, teach or show or express occultism in my books, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I have a question about because I also write it's kind of historical fiction, magical
Mhm.
realism. And when I first started working with Amanda, and she was asking me about like what characters do you most resonate with that I've written, because I had a whole cast at this point. And I
Yes.
remember thinking, like, all of them at some degree, like at some level, all of them hold or contain some bit of like my personality or my experience or my interest or something. So
Right.
um, I found that really helpful to giving voice to these different characters.
Hmm.
So yeah, I've absolutely struggled when it's like time for one of them to either go or have something not so fun happen,
Yes.
because you're like kind of putting yourself in that
Right.
situation. But I also found it like I think Amanda during my first book and our very first in-person retreat, I was writing a chapter and it was just like a chapter because I
Hmm.
really went into this in the beginning. This is just fiction story for people to read, having not tapped into the idea that it was also my story in it. And like, writing this chapter and having all these feelings and symptoms and, really later being able to realize I was like writing a part of my own story into the fiction.
Ah,
Right.
yes.
So I was, that's very long, but like curious about with, automatons or vampires or wizards, do you find that they're still threaded through like with elements of you and or people in your life?
Oh, yes, I think there has to be because we have to draw from somewhere, right? Either we're drawing from our own experiences or we're drawing from our inspirations around us or, from people in our daily life. Like, I could think of certain like personalities who are like, oh, that's like my, grandma who's like no nonsense and will tell you the blunt truth to your face. Or, this is like, my best friend who's loyal and, she will ride and die with you. And, you take bits of that and you infuse those into your world. And I think that's part of what makes it authentic and reaches readers because when you do that, they're able to see
Mm.
aspects of their lives or people they know. It's like, oh, okay. Like I really resonate with that character, or this made me laugh because it reminded me of my mom, things like that. So I think you have to, weave those in because that's part of you, that's part of your creation, and also readers will appreciate that.
Mm. Mhm.
So when your mom read the book, did she recognize herself in any of the characters? Or
Yes,
does her
she
husband?
did. She totally did. There's a character in the story. It's like an middle-aged French woman who is with the Re French Resistance, and she serves kind of as a safe house for my spy. And, she's like, I'm kind of old and tired and nearly out of the fight, but, I just want to help where I can. And that's kind of how I saw my mom, where she's like, sometimes I just feel so tired, but I help where I can because she was always, the nurturer, the giver, the helper, even when she was tired, even when she needed a vacation or a break. And so just and that tireless effort, having someone like that is like you see them as like your rock, your foundation. And that's, such a great character to have in the story because what I learned from like another like experienced writer who was kind of a mentor to me, they're like, your your characters, your main character, they're always going to have some type of home base. And the home base can be like another character who's like their home, their foundation, or it can be like a physical place, like, where do we go after we get beat up and we need to go rest or, recuperate. So you need your home base. And I think that that concept just kind of like brings, your reader in like that idea of home base and being there with your characters and in your world.
I love that.
Mhm.
Everybody needs a home base.
Yes.
My mom would have been like, God, but there's this one character who's just pissing me off so much, and I was just
I
writing me nuts. Why
know.
did you put her in there?
Yeah,
It would have been
you
like,
get that sometimes with the they call them the too stupid to live characters who just make these decisions and get themselves put into danger unnecessarily. You're like, why did you do
there's a name for them.
that?
Yeah, I have a question for you about your use of AI or your thoughts about it, because you've been doing this long enough that it wasn't available up at the beginning, probably to the degree that it is today. So
Mhm.
do you, because I've talked to a lot of creatives, and particularly this one novelist right now that I'm working with, who AI, sort of like your automaton, is what you said.
Yes, yes.
It's like a part of the story, and it's a central piece. And so
Hmm.
as he was working on the world, and as he was constructing the answer for the conflict that was happening, AI
Hmm.
played this huge part in it. And so he had to really work out the limits, right? Like what are
Yes,
negotiate his, like
yes.
this is what I will allow it to do. This is where I need to have limitations around it and rules. And so when AI finally, like when it was time to make agents, he was like, and so I'm getting funny, these amazing things from him where he's using it to develop, to check his outline, to make sure that there are no holes, right? That are like kind of like you said,
Yes.
where'd the sword go? There was a sword
Hmm.
at the beginning of this, and we can't find it, you know.
Yes.
And so instead of reading his, because his first three books are like 500 or 600 pages a piece, and he
Hmm.
has this entire saga, he's using it to shorten up the research and fill any gaps and those sorts of things, or expose them at least. But then he has very specific, like, there are certain things he won't allow it to do.
Hmm.
And so I'm curious for you, like, what are your thoughts about it? What's your use of it? What are your own limits?
Oh, well, I think it's definitely a great tool to use, a collaborative tool in the process when you're plotting and planning and laying things out. If you want to brainstorm, in fact, I am pretty much confident that when I'm ready to do my dissertation, it will be on the use of AI, as an educational tool and and with the broader implications of it for the writing process, because I do use it for like my marketing, program an agent to set up a marketing schedule for me so that I don't spend 2 or 3 hours trying to make Facebook posts or Pinterest pans or whatever. um, Send that to AI and let it plan that out for me and set it up. Or with the when it comes to my writing, I'll put in, okay, here's my outline. Are there any plot holes? Am I missing something? Or maybe I'm like, uh, I want to make sure that this is, 80,000 to 100,000 words. Let me know how many words per chapter I need to hit or something like that. Or I've written myself into a corner. Brainstorm with me. So instead of just sitting back and, here's a prompt, write me a fantasy story about this and just copy paste. It's like, no, because you're just entering a prompt and then getting output. But if you're actually using it as a tool so that you can go and write and do your story and fill it in, I think that's very beneficial. But like you said, there is a fine line. You have to put in certain boundaries, and parameters, because it can blur the line. How much of it is you? How much of it is AI? My opinion is that, it's here, it's not going anywhere. I don't think it's going to be as all-consuming as some people think it will be. And then there are certain limitations to it still, because the AI, it still hallucinates. Like I will ask for certain things and I can tell it's hallucinating. And I'm like, this is why AI is dumb. You still need a human being. And even my husband, he will tell you the same thing with art.
Mm.
Um, because, he started working on the television show back in 1998 when they were still doing hand-drawn, animation cells. And they moved up to doing, the digital. And so, he uses a tablet to do the art for the show. But when it comes to AI art, he's like, you still have to know what you're doing and you have to know how to direct it and you have to, because it can be an unwieldy tool. And some people, they would just want to just put in their prompts and get books and flood, the retailers flood Amazon with their books just because it's a numbers game. If I just put out enough books, then I'll make some money. And in fact, I just read about an author, and her name escapes me, where she did publish just a ton of books, and admitted it was AI. And, she made a good amount of money just because she just put out so many. And she put it out, I believe, in the romance genre, which is the most popular genre to write in. And I was like, okay, if that's what you're going for, I guess. I mean, but you have to be honest with yourself, like, why am I writing? What do I want to put out there? And what do I want to gain from it? And you're like, yeah, it is nice to make income from writing. I've made, tens of thousands of dollars, from my books. Where the money went, that's another story, but but it's like what I want the most is for people to enjoy my stories. Um, and that's why I like going through the writing process. That's why I partner with other authors and we co-write a book. And you can't fake that, right? So it's like my boundary, like for me personally, is okay, it's my tool for certain tasks, or it's my tool for, brainstorming or research, but I am responsible for the writing because at the end of the day, I want you, the reader, to read my story. And as you said, Carlin Laurie, you touched upon it. This is a part of you. You're drawing from your experiences, your heart, your soul, a piece of you, a piece of your personality, things that you love, hate, like, dislike. It's all in there. And how are you going to get that from the output of the machine? So, yeah, let the unscrupulous people, do what they will. But, those of us who are like truly in it because this is our passion, I think that's what's going to shine through and, set us apart.
I agree. Thank you. I feel like we could keep talking to you. I didn't even get to my question, but we're coming up to the hour. So I feel like maybe we have a second interview to ask about some of those things
Okay.
for your particular genre, because I know that, every genre has its unique approach to those marketing questions. And you don't just write a screenplay. You have to, well, you shouldn't just write a screenplay. You have to have enough have to have enough audience feedback and desire coming
Yeah.
your way to warrant that amount of energy to learn something new, to pitch it, to sweat on the phone while you're talking to the producer. So there's a whole bunch of steps that I think it's important for people to hear about. But I think we should wrap this for today. So I want to thank you for sharing. This is really exciting, and obviously all the creative folks here are super
Yes.
excited to have someone in the space who is has been doing this for so long and has so much experience. So thank you for sharing today.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
Thank you, Alyssa, Carlin, Lori.
it's
So
exciting.
nice to meet you.
Yeah,
Nice to
thank
meet
you.
you.
It's nice talking. I'm looking forward to the next one.
Right?
Yeah.
Can't wait. You do that tomorrow? No.
Definitely, we have to definitely do this again.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thanks again. Thanks to my allies for being here and making sure that we got as much as we could out of this delightful hour. And thank you to those listening to this episode of Sips of Story. If you like what you heard, consider subscribing, leaving a review, sharing it with all of the people in your world who need a little inspiration to know that, man, the writing process, it's such a gift. It's such a gift. And even if you don't plan on being an author, the opportunity to just sit down and write for a little bit and write a short story, just see what happens. So with that, I'll say it's a wrap. Thank you again.